listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me as usual, Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's a bit of a funky record time for us. We're doing Tuesday evening because that's just kind of how our schedules worked out this week. This is our second round preview show combined with a little bit of our first round recap show. We do have some Flyers news to get into off the top here. As we're diving into everything, make sure to check us out on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. All right. As we're getting into today's show here, like I mentioned, we do have a little bit of Flyers news. Probably the biggest news as far as the current roster goes that's happened since our last show was that Ivan Fedotov has signed his extension. It's 2 years, just north of $3 million. Heavily rumored that it was agreed upon before he even came over, really.
Right.
Tough to evaluate based on the 4 games he appeared in towards the end of the season.
The 1 3/4 games that he played, because that's really how it is. I mean, he came in and relieved twice.
After coming over from Russia, playing on a different sized ice. It's tough to evaluate as it sits here, but if he turns into the goaltender that he should be, that we all think he's going to be, I think it's a reasonable number. Yeah, I think it's a reasonable number. And more importantly, I think it's a reasonable number when combined with Sam Ersson.
That's the big thing is if on the surface by itself, you are paying a guy over $3 million a year that is completely unproven at the NHL level.
That has a game and a half on NHL ice.
And one good relief appearance that got your team to overtime against the Islanders, and one start where he didn't look so good. It's not enough to evaluate the guy. It's just not. So,
no.
The fact that it was partially agreed upon before he ever actually came over makes a lot of sense. And I think what you just brought up is exactly the key point, that if you combine the two you got to think about some of the other teams in the league and what they're paying their goaltenders combined.
Right.
This still puts the Flyers probably in the back half of that list in the NHL.
Sure.
If it's under $5 million, that's a big deal.
If you have a real tandem here, and assuming that they are both NHL goalies of some quality, right? Obviously, you're not expecting Vezina numbers for under $5 million combined. But if you can get reasonable goaltending out of this duo, then the number for your goaltending position, fantastic. Not sad about it. The other thing is they are both only 2-year deals, so you're not locking yourself into any stupid stuff long term. I think this is a solid little piece of business out of Danny Briere.
Well, and here's the thing too. What you're trying to position yourself for is, one, you're giving yourself a complete safety net in terms of you don't have to do anything with Alexei Kolosov for a year. You let him go and work in the minors, and he's the number 1 for the Phantoms for a year, and you just let him work. That's already a benefit. He gets to work. He's the youngest guy that's going to be in North America. Let's just put it that way.
There's no question about, does the team need him? Any of that? Nope.
Right. Well, because the other piece of news was that Zevragin, the other goalie that they drafted in last year's draft, got moved or either got traded or signed. It was kind of confusing how it was all put together, but he is now going to be playing for Cheska in Russia also. So you've got all of these pieces in there, and he might be, we've talked about him before a little bit. We touched on him where it's like he might be the best of the bunch potentially.
Sure.
But you're not going to know that for several years either. And
of course,
and Kolosov's the same way. You need to give him a little bit of time to kind of round this thing out a little bit. And if that means for a couple of years that you kind of balance out with, first of all, I think that it's also, I find it anyway, very fitting for a, supposed rebuilding team. This is the position that they actually seem to be doing the most rebuilding with, because you're asking yourself for another year. Okay. For half of a year, or roughly half of a year, Sam Ersson looked like a legit number 1. Yeah. Could be. You don't know for sure.
For a solid 35, 40 games.
And the big issue was that you had to roll him out for
almost every game. Too much.
Almost every game of the second half of the season, because it was him or nothing. You didn't have anybody else that you could put in there reliably.
You mean to tell me that Cal Peterson wasn't an option?
No, I don't think he was after a certain point.
The
fact that Danny Briere went and got a goalie from Russia who had no prior NHL experience, and they started him in a game in a playoff race, should tell you everything you need to know about the other two guys.
It tells you the position they were in, for sure.
So I want to see Sam Ersson play a normal workload and actually have a guy who's backing him up. And I think Fedotov can do that.
Sure, and he's a little bit older. Theoretically, he's a little bit more physically prepared to play a little bit of a bigger workload, and obviously he's got to adjust to North American ice.
And I think they were right about the assessment at the end of the season. He might have been a little out of shape, all things considered. Like, it's tough to be ready to go when you went from playing your KHL season to a little bit of uncertainty of where you were going to end up, and then it was within a week. We're just plopping you into this situation
in an NHL game,
and within 3 days,
playoff race.
Well, and within 3 days, you're in.
Yep.
How crazy is that?
And oh, by the way, it's a playoff race, and we really need these points. And please don't screw it up.
Right. And, I he just needs an off season. He needs time to stay and work, and then let's see what happens. I can't wait for his first preseason start just to see what kind of sharpness he's got. And to be honest, don't be surprised. I believe they gave Sam Ersson a lot more of the preseason last year because going into the year, everything, before the Carter Hart situation comes up, you knew Carter Hart was otherwise your number one going in. So you don't need to play him.
You expect Carter Hart to start 55 games for it.
Right. So you don't need to play him in the preseason. I think that's the exact path that Sam Ersson's getting. He doesn't need to play as many preseason games. He might get one in full down the stretch, but you're not going to sit there and kind of toy with him throughout the course of this thing.
I think you're definitely going to get a lot of time.
Yeah. And I like
just live ice time on North American ice, getting views of North American angles, right? Because the ice is smaller, shots are coming at you from different positions. Let him get used to that in live game situation. I think he mimight be the best 27-year-old preseason player we've ever seen.
He could be. Who knows? But and they'll give because Cal Peterson will still be here. They'll be able to bury that contract in the minors for another year, but he'll probably get a look regardless because you're going to create a little bit of a competition here. You got to be real about it. You're going to allow Peterson and Fedotov to kind of compete with each other to see whether or not, one way or the other. Now that they do have to, tread lightly on the whole deal with Fedotov because it's, he's over here to play in the NHL. Right. Not necessarily to go back to the minor. So
no.
And look, I think regardless, he's going to be better than what Peterson would give you. So I don't think it's going to matter. But my point is that you'll trade out little pieces here and there in the preseason for Peterson's going to play a little bit. I'm sure you'll see Kolosov get a look in an NHL game. Just, it's preseason. You give a guy a try and then you send him back. Let's put it this way. The first preseason game of last preseason, they had Oliver Bonk and Denver Barkey in the lineup because they thought that from their rookie camp, they earned a look in an NHL preseason game and they got a cool experience out of it. And I'm going to lay a wager that it probably made them better players in the junior ranks when it came time to go back because you just played a preseason game against the real guys, the much older, much more experienced team. Yeah.
Well, and by the way, since you mentioned it, I figure it's a good spot to just slip it in
throw
here.
It in, yeah.
Oliver Bonk and Denver Barkey and the rest of the London Knights have made it to the OHL Championship. They will be attempting to qualify for the Memorial Cup. I believe that'll be starting this week. But they both look really good. Again, Denver Barkey was a third-round pick.
I told you a couple weeks ago, it's a crime if that team doesn't make it to the Memorial Cup. It's a crime if they don't win.
And
that London team has been so good for the course of the season that it really would just be, they just belong there. And then to be able to potentially see whatever they do from there, obviously this one more series to go before they're there. And then you're in the Memorial Cup. So
yeah, I feel like the hockey world throws around the word wagon pretty lightly.
Oh, the
London Knights are a wagon.
Yeah, they are.
The London Knights are a wagon.
All right. There's no way around that one.
Yeah, so we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, we'll give you a little update if they go on and win the OHL Championship, qualify for the Memorial Cup, all of that stuff. Probably take care of that on our next show here. So we've been talking about a guy coming out of Russia here. We talked about Fedotov coming over. Caught him a little bit off guard.
Yeah.
We talked about Zavragin briefly there. Kevin, would you say either one of those guys is the most notable Russian prospect in the system?
Now, the answer to that. It's no. The guy that they drafted in the first round last year is clearly the most important.
Yeah, especially with the circumstances surrounding him.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not going to just dance around this here. Like the rumors are out there that there's a lot of noise going on right now.
There's a lot of noise.
Now the validity of a Russian report that there's talks, at least, to be honest, wouldn't surprise me, because you had to have a conversation to get Fedotov over here in some capacity. So I wouldn't be shocked at all if there's a way to have a conversation about Michkov.
Yeah,
for sure. How soon does it happen? I don't know. I wouldn't expect it this year, because I think that burning 2 years of KHL contract sounds a little wishful thinking.
A little expensive.
I mean, listen, if there's a way to make it happen, and let's be clear, one of the keys that was kind of part of this was that, look, if they think, and I don't doubt this, if they think he can play in the NHL effective immediately, and that's the plan, and he gets to play in the NHL, like, they're not going to put up with, let's bring him over and then maybe bump him to the minors. They're not going to put up with this. So that you either bring him over to permanently play him in the NHL, or you do not. So
and we've heard rumors of, if there is an agreement reached to bring him over, that it would have some sort of clause like that, where if the Flyers wish to send him down or don't think he's ready for the NHL, he would be optioned back to the KHL.
Correct.
Yes.
Well, because the key also is that it's about where he ends up playing too. You know, like, he's still property of the team that he was drafted from St. Petersburg. He's still property of that team, but he, you know, whether he's on loan to Sochi or whatever the case may be, it's like, one way or the other, he's not playing for that team.
Right.
You know, it seems abundantly clear he's not playing for that particular team, and he's either going on loan to a team that doesn't have as much talent. So he's, you know,
going and
he's leading the team. You know, he's leading the team. Well, he's leading the team in scoring because he's their best player by far.
Right.
You know,
the KHL and the KHL and the associated minor leagues are, for people that may not know, are supremely feast or famine. There's a couple teams at the top who they get the money from literal Russian oligarchs. And they are funded and well run and good teams. And then pretty much everyone else is there to get beaten up on by the good teams.
Yeah.
So I mean, if he's not playing for one of the good teams and they do send him to one of those kind of feeder teams, he's probably going to be one of their best players.
And he was this year, and he's 18, you know, he's still 18 because he was 17 technically when they drafted him, right?
Scored more goals than Panarin and Ovechkin, I believe.
Right. Like, there's a bunch of stuff that it's just ridiculous. And he's got skill, you know, he's got more skill in his fingertips than he's got more skill in his fingertips than most players have. So it just, you know, the idea, and I get it. Everybody is salivating over the idea that this could happen. I've always been, you know, especially first of all, certainly when it comes to anything with Michkov in particular, but in general, when it comes to anything down this avenue, tread lightly with it, because you just never know how far things are really going or whatever. Chances are, if this is, but here's the thing. Chances are, if this is going to happen, it's going to happen the same way they drafted him and the same way they got Fedotov to come over. It's going to be done very secretly until it's done, right? Until they can actually say, here it is. Now, I understand.
Until the ink is dry, it's not we don't know it's happened until the ink's dry.
Yep. Now, I understand if people are salivating over the idea of this. So people see a picture, or it was on his Instagram, right, that he's wearing Flyers gear while working out. Everybody's hyped up about it because, you know, it looks like, you know, that's what, you know, I know you're trying to read between the lines. You're looking for signs, right? You're looking for clues.
Of course.
And I understand, just pump the brakes a little bit, you know, just pump the brakes until everything is absolutely 1,000% official with stuff like this, because it's all very wishful thinking right now. It's just very wishful thinking. I'm not trying to tell you that there's no merit to any of it or anything like that. I certainly do think, and I think we had talked about this before when Fedotov came over, that there might be a door open to at least some communication here, right?
It certainly seems as though Russia is willing to talk to Danny Briere.
And that's a big deal for what they're working on. I mean, they've got a lot invested between Fedotov and certainly Michkov. But when you factor in, even down to getting Kolosov over and Zavergan, who is the other goalie, and all this stuff like that, like, you've got enough pieces in place here. And it's not to say that that's where, you got to remember something. It's never, I won't say never, but it may not be the end of it. We could be sitting here in a few months talking about another Russian prospect, maybe not who they take in the first round, but it might be somebody in the second or third or something like that,
Unless Demidov slips. Anyway,
I mean, I hear you. Well, I'm not ruling out anybody who might be a Russian prospect, though. I mean, there's guys from all sorts of angles here, and that's my point. You don't want to do something that really wrecks that whole thing, because you know how much your future may hinge on something like that.
Danny Briere's not in the business of burning that bridge, especially at this point in time. I do think so. I think a couple things are also true. I think it's true that it's probably unlikely he's here this season, but I think it is 80% more likely than it was 3 weeks ago. Right? We've had the statements out of.
Well, I think that there's definitely a percentage increase on the likelihood that it happens this year based on everything that's out there now.
Right. And again, I'm not saying it's necessarily supremely likely. Pump the brakes.
No. And like, that's why, like, my main thought is, I think it's so much more likely now that it would actually happen a year early on the contract. Like, right now, you're still 2 years early on the contract. I think a lot would have to go right for you to do this now.
I think next summer.
Yeah, I think the door is very much open for, hey, we're down to that final year. Can we work out something? I think that because that line of communication is there, it's way more likely. And even then, somehow, like, I know that I'm making this a bigger point now because of the fact that there's potentially lines of communication already, and there's 2 more years to go. I'm still going off of the belief, like, I would still be surprised if it was a year early, because I'm going off the belief that it's not going to happen until he's out of that contract.
Of course.
Because that's just the way you got to think.
And as fans, I think that is the mindset that we should have, where it set the bar low. He's got 2 years left on the deal. If we get word that he's coming over a year early, that's great. If we get some miracle confirmation that he's coming out 2 years early, consider it a miracle, essentially.
Oh, definitely. 1,000%.
But as it sits, we don't know. But like I said, I think it's way more likely than it was a month ago. On another note, y'all, stop reading so much into his Instagram. Right, just because he's in a hotel doesn't mean it's, the Philadelphia Marriott. Just because he's in a gym doesn't mean it's in Voorhees.
Well, you know what else it is, though, too? Like he didn't get a shirt for getting drafted. You know what I mean? Like it's as if he got sent the shirt because something's gonna happen.
Right.
And he happened to be wearing it today or whatever day it was, you know, that video's from. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's also an element where, like I said, in the word, I'm going to keep using that word for it because it is what people are doing. Everybody is absolutely salivating over this idea.
Myself included, for the record.
Let the kid live.
Sure.
Let the kid have a life. That's just as important at this point, right? Like, we don't need to go to some extreme here where it's, because realistically speaking, there's not a lot of this that's in his control. I mean, he probably wants to play in the NHL. I'm not saying that, but
it's unlikely that he's buying himself out of his contract.
I would say so. I think that, and that's why the whole terminology was about it kind of being a loaner type thing.
An agreement.
Where it's like,
yes.
Right. That essentially, if something didn't work out at the NHL level, they would loan him back to the KHL because it would be done that way.
Right. Because little recap. I know we've talked about it on the show before, but the way KHL contracts work basically is a player can buy himself out of the contract, but he has to pay it himself. And it's essentially his own salary. He has to pay it back.
Right.
I think if something happens this summer, it is pretty likely that it is a loan agreement, kind of similar to what we were just talking about. I don't
even want to speculate on that type of stuff because it's way beyond,
I think next summer it's a little more likely of a clean buyout and a clean break with Russia.
Right. Well, because at that point in time, you're not worried about whether or not you loan him back. let's also be real about something. You're not going backwards here. If you think he's ready to play now, what do you think happens if he plays? Right. Yeah. But like, if you think he's ready now, what makes you like, what happens in a year? He's even more ready. Right. Yeah. Like then at that point you are, buy out the contract because you're not coming over here.
Get this guy to the NHL now.
Like right now there's still, and there's going to be regardless, like he's going to have an adjustment period. Don't get me wrong, but I think there would still be this little bit of an element like even if they think he's ready, there would be an element of, is he ready? Because you'd have to see it in action. Like there's going to be there's kind of like a question about that because he did have a great year. Don't get me wrong, but having a great year in the KHL playing for a lesser team doesn't amount to you're going to and not that any rookie does completely transform the team that they go to.
Of course.
But you get what I'm saying.
I don't know, man. Connor McDavid kind of transformed the Oilers.
Well, okay, McDavid's a different animal. I'm looking at, but I'm looking at Bedard, for example, and I know Bedard was hurt for a chunk of the year, but it's like it doesn't make the Chicago
Colorado was still, or Chicago was still awful, right?
Right, like it doesn't change that, even though he's a great player, right? Like, and as ready as he was to play there, that.
He would have scored 30 easy if it wasn't for the injury.
Right. So I think that there's an element where you're looking for him to kind of like, can he play this year? Whereas next year you would be probably sitting there saying, this isn't a can he, this is a he's going to.
Is he playing on your second line or your first line?
Pretty much. I mean, you would probably try that anyway this year, like immediately.
You know what I mean.
Oh, I know. I'm saying you would probably do it anyway, but I can also see some like, hey, we're going to try him at the top because he's advertised as that kind of player. And you do bring the coach into it a little bit because you sit there and you go, hey, listen, how long of a leash is John Tortorella going to have on a player like that to sit there and be like, hey, if it doesn't amount to results, is he playing fourth line? Because if he is, then you have some questions again. Like this is the compromise you've got to have with John Tortorella as your coach, right?
I was about to say, I don't want Danny Briere interfering in the day-to-day line decisions. When it comes to a kid like this, you got to talk to your coach. If he ends up on the fourth line, like you got to talk to your coach and be like, listen, come on, John.
I know.
And obviously this is far down the road. It's probably not even a problem for this year. Hopefully it's a problem next year.
Right.
Something that is happening this year. I'm going to transition us into our last Flyers topic here. Something that will be happening this year is the NHL draft. It does happen every year. The draft lottery was just before we started recording here, and nothing happened.
Yeah, basically.
The
whole board stayed the same.
For the first time that I can remember, the pre-lottery leak turned out to be false, and B, nothing changed. Obviously, statistically, this is what should happen, but it almost never does, and it's kind of weird to see.
I mean, what's interesting to me, and I know that there was a lot made of Chicago winning it last year, going from third to first, but a team in the top three that had the three best odds still did get up there, and in the top three. Yeah. It's almost like since they've gone to the 2 lottery draw system,
the 10 spot jump,
and just in general, only 2 pulls,
right?
It feels like there's, obviously there's already less movement because you're taking one of the drawings away, but I think in general, there actually has been just less movement. And now it's like, if you finish where you think you finish, you're going to probably pick there.
Right. Well, and I think these teams at the bottom, quite frankly, complained about it. I know Detroit was pretty unhappy through their rebuild that they never really got any sort of lottery luck. But yeah, since they've gone to the two drawings and the 10 spot maximum jump and all that stuff, it does seem like there has been less, and that was held this year, which, like I said, no movement at all.
Now, despite that, I got to ask you, despite that, when it's down to San Jose and Chicago, is there a second 100%. where you're thinking here we go again, and like what kind of stupid luck does? Now, granted, if they would have moved up from 2 to 1. They wouldn't, that still counts as a win, and they would not have been able to move up again for the next 5 years. That's the rule. No, I'm just pulling that out there, like that's what the rules say of this thing. But it would have just been like, come on, seriously,
like these guys again.
Believe me, I know we were all thinking it for a second, but I'm like, good for San Jose that they actually get, a guy like this. Actually, it's really it's really interesting too because, and look, as weird as it was on the broadcast that they had Macklin Celebrini there, and it seemed like
It was
he
a little
so
awkward.
not interested in talking about anything. That being said, like he does have some familiarity with that general area because his dad works for the Golden State Warriors, and that's same area. So, if assuming that's where he goes, which why would he go anywhere else?
And I gotta say, man, if you're 18, 19 years old and about to be a millionaire, there are worse places to live than Southern California.
Sure.
Yeah, I know the Sharks are a black hole at this point in terms of talent.
I mean, once some of their I'm not trying to change a whole bunch here. Like their last 2 first-round picks are potential cornerstones. You've got to acknowledge that. Now, if they get Celebrini and they have Will Smith as the other pick, it's like, okay, you got 2 really good pieces to start working with. I'll give you that much. Look, they probably don't have, don't know that they got a goaltender, don't know that they got a cornerstone defenseman, but you've got some stuff to work with.
Yeah.
You got to start somewhere, and they really needed to start somewhere. And let's not forget, they also have the 14th overall pick now.
That is true. Yeah, because the Penguins...
I shouldn't say that. They always did have the pick as long as Pittsburgh wasn't in the top 10.
Right, and because there was no movement, Pittsburgh did not spike. That pick transfers to San Jose, and they will have
imagine how they feel,
14.
by the way. You know what I mean? Like I know everybody was kind of lamenting the end of the Flyers season for like, oh, they're going to pick in the teens basically or whatever. You could be the Penguins and have traded for Erik Karlsson, not make the playoffs and lose your pick.
Yeah, Kyle Dubas is in a tough spot there. He's got some messes to clean up.
So you got that, right? But the Flyers are picking 12th, no movement. So they're picking 12th. Look, this stuff doesn't faze me anyway. Like it's like I've been talking about this for several shows now since kind of toward the end of the season. You got to have trust that your general manager knows how to draft. And
absolutely,
as the board shakes out and as you create your own rankings, which Danny Briere will do, and the group of scouts and others who are in the front office will do.
Well, and a lot of you do your work. And a lot of your big pundits have kind of mentioned that outside of literally number 1, Macklin Celebrini, it's pretty flat 2 through 15 to 17 or so.
Right. And
there's a really good group of players there, but there's not kind of 3 or 4 tiers like there normally is in the first round.
What's getting curious too, because what's going to get curious is that the Flyers really have, it depends on how you want to look at it, because when things came down to it, the Flyers traded for Jamie Drysdale when things came down to it. And Drysdale has kind of become that, at least in their eyes, that cornerstone defenseman, or that's what they want him to be, right? Now, whether he can be that or not is still obviously up for interpretation and up for debate, and you got to let it play out and all of that, right? But if in their eyes, they've got this group of defensemen that includes Drysdale, Cam York, Igor Zamula, Sanheim might be in that grouping technically. You got Emil Andra. You got enough guy Oliver Bonk now because you drafted him first round this year. And that doesn't mean you're not taking another defenseman first round this year. You got 2 picks. No. Yep. But is your priority going to be try to get the best forward potentially? And how does the board shake out that that's what it leads you to? Like it's no secret they need some centermen. So if that's the direction that it takes you, maybe, I don't know. Yep. And that's the interesting part is you're right. It's number 1. It's Celebrini, and then I've seen it go so many different ways. Now I think that Demidov is number 2.
Okay, and I don't think that's entirely impossible. I think a lot of it is going to depend on team need.
I think there's an element of
kind of that first 10, 12 picks or so it's. Sometimes teams down there are picking best player available, and I think because of the relatively flat talent level among that next batch of prospects, I think teams are going to be a lot more likely to pick something they need, right? If you need a winger, grab a winger.
Well, and that's the interesting part to me, right? Because I think that they could have a need for both. I don't think you should ignore the idea that a defenseman's there and go for it, because
I agree.
I'm not convinced you have a number 1 right now.
I've mentioned it on this show before. I think you have 3 or 4 number 2s.
And I obviously you have need at center. So if there's a good center waiting there for you, I think you do that also. Like, I really don't have, And that it's going to go for both sides of it, because wherever this other pick is, wherever Florida's pick ultimately amounts to be, you want to be mindful of what you're kind of, kind of just like, and I'm like, kind of, you want to be mindful just like you were last year about, okay, maybe when you pick with that first pick, maybe the best player is this, and you're thinking about keeping positional need in mind a little more with the second pick because of the fact that you went one way or the other. But I think you're trying to create some balance with these picks, especially in the first round, because and I don't think I also don't think that anything about this takes you out of play for getting somebody decent with the latter pick. Like,
I absolutely agree.
You've got to develop guys, and if you're going to do this right, you have to find some finds.
You have to find your Denver Barkeys, another name that we keep bringing up on this show.
Yeah, and I mean, it's super early for him, too. I'm not trying to jump the gun with him at all.
Sure, but with Danny Briere only having
one in the third round. You're right. Like, teams find guys in the third round.
Sure, Braden Point was a third-round pick. There's a ton of them, a ton of third-round picks.
Braden Point's my favorite of the third-round picks to bring up, because
exactly
that's the type of guy you build your team around.
Exactly, and a ton of guys become superstars after being drafted in the third round.
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%. So,
all right.
There's not much more to go over, because the draft portion is we'll do way more with picks later. There's guys we'll be talking about when it gets closer. Sure. Honestly, there's an element right now, because there's certain. I don't know how many of them are actually doing this, but I know there's a handful of them. Celebrini is one of them, actually, who's going to play in World Championships. So, there's always room for last minute shuffling because a guy plays a little longer or something like that,
Also worth noting, by the way, Joel Farabee will also be playing.
Joel Farabee scored a goal earlier, I believe.
Did he? Is that?
Okay. Well, it was prelim. It was preliminary competition, but he was on a line with oh goodness, it's
was two Johnny Gaudreau?
No, he had Ryan Leonard and somebody else. It was college level guys. So it might have been Will Smith. It might have been Will Smith. Honestly.
Okay.
And Leonard set him up.
He's the grizzled vet on that line.
I know, right? But Leonard set him up for, I believe, it was the opening goal of what was a 6-2 win for them. I mean, that's both Canada and US's roster for the World Championships is ridiculous. I mean, it really is.
Wow, you can tell those programs are really gearing up for not only the Four Nations Cup this fall or next fall or whenever that is, but also the Olympics, right? We're starting to get some eyes on guys and starting to figure out who's going to fill out your Olympic roster.
I think that I actually think the first thing you said is almost not, I won't say more important, but I think it actually carries a lot more
first
weight.
And foremost.
It just carries a lot more weight than you think. Like
you think that the international hockey programs care about the Four Nations Cup?
I think that there's an element where it's at least a setup for, like, hey, if you're trying to figure out where you think you're going to go with these Olympic rosters, this is a place to start.
Okay, so you think it's kind of going to be almost a preseason, a training camp, something
a little bit.
Those lines?
I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be. It's international competition that allows you to have a potential opportunity to go somewhere with it. So yeah, why not? But
it's going to be interesting to see how all that plays out. But
anywho, as we get ready to transition to playoff stuff,
right? Speaking of high level competition, we do also have the NHL playoffs going on. We are going to do a quick little break here, and then we will be back with our first round recap, our second round preview. So, all right, stick with us. All right, and we're back with our playoff recap preview, our NHL conversation. We've concluded the Flyers portion of the evening. As we dive into it here, we're going to start in the Metro, mostly because this is the first series that started, and also Game 2 is currently going on as we speak.
Yeah, and what we're going to do is we're going to break it down by conference too. So we're going to do the East, and then we'll do the West. So yes. So all right. So we want to start with. So we're
starting in the Metro.
So we're doing the Metro, how they got here, and then the current series.
Absolutely.
Right.
So
do we really want to spend that much time on the how they got here?
I mean, we can blow through it pretty quick because the first round here was probably the least interesting of the series. It was the
most lopsided first round matchups possible.
Yes. So the Rangers took care of the Washington Capitals in 4 games. Washington kind of just looked happy to be there.
That's putting it so nicely.
Listen, Washington looked like the gas tank was empty from the push. even though no team really pushed to make it, but whatever.
What did I tell you as they were trying to get into the playoffs? They were trying to get into the playoffs. It was, hey, they'll go as far as Alex Ovechkin wants to drag them through it, right? And
then he had no points in a playoff.
Who had no points in the series
for the first time in his career? Was that, or for the first time in a very long time?
Definitely in a very long time. And I mean, it was also riding the wave of Charlie Lindgren was playing really well, and
it's just not the same in the playoffs.
It's not the same. Look who you're playing. You got the President's Trophy winners who looked every bit the part.
The Rangers are a wagon. I mentioned it about the London Knights earlier. The Rangers fit the bill too.
But even like to go back and look at the final scores of that series, even like for having to me 2 or 3 relatively close games by score, this was so not close.
No. And like,
you know what I mean? Like you had a 4-3 game, a 3-1 game, and a 4-2 game, and all of them to me were like it was
decided
so
by the middle of the second period.
Obvious. Yeah. It was so apparently obvious how on another level the Rangers were compared to the Capitals. And I know this is something that was talked about a little bit. At least it was talked about on social circles a little bit. Look, I don't know what kind of series it would have been if it was somebody else. I can tell you, look, and I know that everybody wants to put the Flyers in there.
The teams that were there, I think it would have looked pretty similar for everybody except maybe Pittsburgh.
I have a different theory. I think Detroit would have made that fun. Because Detroit was they were just not going away. They're young, and that youthful kind of vibrance
but
can do some things.
Have you considered the fact that Matt Rempe would have murdered Patrick Kane?
Look, maybe. I don't know.
He already got himself in trouble with a hit in that round, and
I hear you.
Man, he would have murdered somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a close series. Let's just be real.
And then the other series was
now I actually think this one was definitely closer than the 4-1 series kind of indicated. I mean,
Carolina taking care of the Rangers in 5, by the way. Or taking care of the Islanders in 5, by the way. Yep.
And I mean, look, I'm not surprised by the result, but to me, I mean, look, that series was lost the second that the Islanders blew a 3-0 lead in game 2.
Yep. That series ended after game 2. And I know that they came back and they won game 4 and they
in double overtime.
Right. They put themselves in a position to not be completely embarrassed. But when you lose game 2 the way they did, 2 goals in 9 seconds to go from ahead 3-2 to behind 4-3, that's a backbreaker. Very few teams can survive that sort of thing, and in a series where you're already pretty outgunned, man, that's the one you could have stolen. If they had stolen that game, we have a series.
There was also a little, and it wasn't super late, and I get it. It wasn't like super late in the game, in the period or anything like that, but there was some poetry to the same thing happening in game 5, where it's a tie game. You're right. Look, they were down 3-1. The Islanders were in game 5, and you're thinking this is the end. Okay,
yep.
Here go. The Hurricanes are going to just pull away, take care of business, and they get it tied before the second
back.
And then 2 goals in 8 seconds, and it's like, all right, never mind.
Any hope you had, any momentum you had coming off a game 4 double overtime win at home.
By the way, I don't know if you watched that one in particular as much. I know you caught the for the other one of the other series we're going to get into, Boston Toronto, that that game 5 in Carolina. Jim Jackson was on the call of that game.
I did catch that, and it was super weird.
It is weird, but it's also good for him that he gets a little bit of extra,
a little bit of national time, a little national exposure.
Time. Well, I thought it was great that he got a Boston Toronto game.
Yeah, it was
prime time material right there.
We'll get into it, but it was Saturday night. It was weird hearing him call a James Van Riemsdyk goal, though. But
for the Boston,
we'll get into that in a few minutes when we get into the Atlantic. So when the Carolina Hurricanes got swept out of the playoffs last year or 2 years ago, it might have been 3 years ago at this point. Time is a circle. Rod Brindamore said it was a close series and that they were all close games and, blah, blah, blah.
That was last year, wasn't that? Was last
final.
Year.
Okay.
It was the conference final.
You're right. It was Florida.
Yeah.
And he caught a lot of flack for that.
Yeah.
Because you got swept.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was wrong at the time. And I think this series was a lot closer than it appeared for a 4-1, right? Like there were times, like I said, if the Islanders take that game 2, if they manage to hold their composure and don't give up 2 goals in
series,
9 seconds, that series might go 6 or 7.
Well,
and when the Islanders have 6 or 7 games to pound on you,
yeah,
they can get some stuff done.
Sure. And well, that's why I thought it was going to be a longer series slightly, because it was like the fact that they were in position to win a game on the road was enough for me, honestly. Like,
exactly.
That started to set it up. And then you had, they win game 4, which would have been, which if they had won, if it was a 2-1 series at that point, then that game 4 is way more dramatic.
Oh, if you're sending it back to Carolina, tied it 2.
And then you're tied through 2 periods in game 5. Like it's, the problem is in that there was, I forget which game it was. I think it was game 2, honestly, because game 2, they had, they're leading in the series or leading in the game 3-0 through 2 periods, but they had something like 13 shots in the first period and then 5 for the rest of the game, 1 in the third period. And it's like, that's a bold strategy, isn't it?
Yeah. Carolina, turns out Carolina's really good defensively.
Exactly. Well, and beyond that, it's just that you leave them enough time to just kind of impose their will on you here. Like, what are you going to do?
Right. You're not going to beat that team unless you're taking it to them. And the Islanders were just never driving the boat. Okay. So did we want to talk about this current matchup, or did we want to go over and do the Atlantic, how they got there first?
Let's stick with the Metro and go into round 2. So actually I'll switch it out for us. Then
absolutely.
We'll go back and forth as we go.
No problem. So as we sit here, the Rangers are up 1-0 in the series. As we mentioned before, game 2 is happening as we're recording this show. So by the time you listen to it, you'll know who's up in the series or if the series is tied or what the deal is. But as of right now, the Rangers have a 1-0 series lead. So obviously the deeper you get into the playoffs, the better the matchups get because the better teams tend to make it. This might be my favorite matchup of this round. It's 2 really good teams who certainly look like they're getting ready to beat the piss out of each other for 6 to 7 games. Game 1 was violent all the way through. Game 2 has already been violent all the way through the first period. We've had our first real honest-to-goodness goalie run of the postseason. I'm looking across, and obviously, like I said, they're all good series. This might be number 1 for me.
So I tried really hard during the first round to not say, can we just get this over with and let the real teams play, kind of. But that's what this feels like a little bit, right? Like now that we're past the first round for both of these teams, this is the matchup that, from the day that we knew who was making the playoffs and everything was lined up and all that stuff like that, because these were the last 2 spots that nobody appeared to want.
Exactly.
Right?
I was going to say, if you ask anybody, take a look at the 16 playoff teams and name the 2 weakest, most people would probably tell you that Washington and the Islanders were the 2 weakest teams getting in, or 2 of the 3 weakest teams getting in, and depending on how you feel about Nashville.
And well, sure. I hear you there. And we'll get to them later.
Sure.
We've had it just feels like just about everybody has had this second round matchup penciled in for about
since mid-January, to be honest.
The only reason I'm not
once Carolina turned it up and started playing real hockey, we knew this is what we were looking at.
The only reason I'm disagreeing with you is because into a portion of February, the Flyers were actually still hanging in that group for a little bit, and people were actually people were getting a little bit and Carolina hadn't hit the groove yet. Like once they hit the groove, you're right. Like as soon as it became apparently obvious that there were 2 clear cut at the top and nothing else, it was when do we get the second round matchup?
Sure. And Rod Brindamore has done a great job of getting this team humming by the playoffs.
Oh, into gear. Yeah, I hear you. And I'm not surprised by that at all. And amid all of the other noise with him,
Oh, man.
all these rumors going on about his future in Carolina. He wants to be there. That's the only place he's saying that's the only place he'll ever coach. There was an offer on the table, then it's gone. Like all these things coming out. Look, bottom line is I don't think he's going anywhere, honestly. And to be honest with you, no. Little anecdote to pull away from this for a second, because I had this ready to go because I tweeted about it the day that it happened, right, or the day that something around it happened, right. So I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. It was right tail end of April, so about a week ago, a little more than a week ago. We're sitting going through the course of the afternoon on April 29th, and here comes a story from not story. Here comes the release from the Seattle Kraken. Dave Hackstall's out as head coach.
Bye, Dave.
Which has nothing to do, has only a small thing to do with this conversation, honestly.
Right.
Because here's my thing, and I tweeted this, so it's out there for people to see if they didn't see it yet. But let me ask you a question.
You gonna ask me who the general manager is in Seattle?
What's that?
You gonna ask me who the general manager?
No,
is
that has
in
nothing
Seattle?
to do with it. It has nothing to do with where Brindamore could go or anything like that.
Right.
It has to do with. Can you tell me how many teams have not made a coaching change since February of 2022?
How many teams have not? So I didn't see this. I don't know.
Okay, can I give here? And I'm not saying giving.
Is it less than half?
Oh, it was easier to list the teams that haven't than it was to list the teams that have.
Okay. I'm gonna guess 9.
It's less than that.
Holy smokes. Okay, how many teams have not made a coaching change since February?
Okay, now I want to immediately put a technicality in here.
Is there an interim here somewhere?
No, the technicality is that if you consider the fact that Arizona is moving.
Sure.
Well, no. So the head coach for the Arizona Coyotes this past year was Andre Tourigny, who was hired in July of 2021.
Okay.
So he actually has been the coach for a good 3
got some
seasons
tenure at this point.
But because the franchise is moving, he becomes the first head coach
in Utah, history.
which means they've made a coaching change.
Okay, sure.
Didn't exist.
Sure,
so it's a technicality.
Okay.
The list beyond that is 5.
Wow.
Now, there's a handful of them that are obvious, and I'm going to give you a hint. We're talking about one of them.
Well, Rod Brindamore is one of them. I know John Cooper is one of them.
John Cooper is not only is one of them, John Cooper is the longest tenured head coach in the NHL at this moment. He has been around. I actually had somebody ask about this afterwards. March 25th, 2013, which people are actually asking, like, that's got to be a record. No, people are asking, that's got to be a record, right? Now, here's the thing. That's 11
modern day record.
Well, it's 11 full seasons. Now, for recent memory, you could go back in fairly recent memory and go Barry Trotz with Nashville was 15 seasons.
Okay.
Lindy Ruff for the first time in Buffalo, which is
he's
weird
back, by the way. Hilarious.
Yeah, which is weird as hell to say also.
Yeah.
It's weird, but it's not, because that was somehow or other kind of predictable at the same time, right?
It's like Rick Bowness going back to finish his career in Winnipeg.
A little bit. And by the way, throw them back into the mix, and not because they fired a coach at least, but
he retired. Yeah.
And to be honest, I fully kind of understood why obviously his wife had a lot of medical issues and things like that over the year. I think he
he's also, I think, 80 years old. So yeah, I give the man a break.
Yeah. Look, I think Rick Bowness is a great guy and seems like a great guy, seems like a great coach. All the best to whatever he decides to do from here on out, because, I can understand why he made the decision he made, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, so Lindy Ruff, the first time around in Buffalo was 15 years. And then you have Joel Quenneville had 11 seasons in Chicago, that big tenure, whatever. The most that I've come across in general is Al Arbor with the Islanders was 20 seasons. Now listen, when you're coaching a legit dynasty that wins 4 Stanley Cups in a row,
fair enough.
That helps. When
you have Mike Gartner, that does a lot for you.
Oh, please. With those Islander teams you're talking about? Jeez, right. Those Islanders teams that you got Mike Bossy, you've got Brian Trottier, you've got Dennis Potvin, you've got Bill Smith in goal. You've only got like 6 Hall of Famers on the roster. But doesn't you're drawing parallels to John Cooper there a little bit, where it's like, you win back-to-back cups, you go to finals multiple times. Like that'll help you keep a job,
Has Laviolette been there since before 2022?
No, Laviolette's in his first year with the Rangers.
Really? Oh, you're right. Okay.
All right. So let me give you.
He just feels like such a natural.
So all right.
To
So
be
you've got Brind'Amour and you've got Cooper. There's three
Okay.
others. I'm going to give you. So here's the hint I'm going to give you for one of them because
Sheldon Keefe is one of them.
Okay, I didn't have to give the hint for him, but
asterisk because I don't know how much longer that one's
well,
gonna
sure,
last.
that was part of the joke. Was like the last guy on the list, who's the most recent of the five. Like I actually put them in a list in order. So Brind'Amour is fourth, by the way. Cooper's the longest tenured. Brind'Amour is fourth. Sheldon Keefe is fifth, and there is the potential that somewhere in the range of 48 to 72 hours after we finish doing this, that he may not be.
Man, that whole Toronto thing. We'll get into that in a minute.
I hear you, but you hear where I'm going with that, right? So, all right. So let me do hints for the other two. So number 3 is definitely not going anywhere anytime soon. He is also a recent Stanley Cup champion.
Is that going to be Jared Bednar then?
Yes.
Okay.
It's going to be Jared Bednar. And then number 2.
Recent Stanley Cup champions. Okay, so it's not DeBoer. Okay, the year before DeBoer, it was. Oh yeah. Okay.
Well, no, so.
Yeah.
Well, no, that wasn't DeBoer either.
Oh no, you're right. It was
Cassidy. And Bruce Cassidy was in his first year there. So
right.
Right.
After they fired DeBoer.
So, right. So number 2 may not be number 2 for too much longer either, because his name's come up before too.
East or West?
East.
Oh, it's Sullivan. Mike Sullivan. Yeah.
But that's the list.
Man,
John Cooper, Mike Sullivan, Jared Bednar, Rod Brind'Amour, Sheldon Keefe. That is the list.
And the Mike Sullivan situation is spicy because it currently seems like him and Kyle Dubas are at a little bit of a standoff here, with assistants getting fired and Sullivan's pissed about it. And
you're talking about
there's all sorts of drama out of Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
And quite frankly, I love to say it.
But like, so you're getting my point right off the bat, right? Like,
yes.
Like, note to Tom Dundon, pay him. You've got one of the 5 longest tenured head coaches in the league right now, who everybody in that organization seems to love playing for.
And he's taking your team at
I don't care what it
rounds
costs.
deep every year.
Yeah. Right. I don't care what it costs. Not only do I say pay him.
The problem isn't pay him. They're willing to pay him, but every 4 years, I don't get it. I honestly don't get it, because he is the most beloved person in Carolina
the
hockey.
Franchise's history.
Right. He is their Bobby Clark, whether you like it or not.
Correct.
He is their Bobby Clark. And Bob Clark never had to advocate for paying Paul Holmgren. Bob Clark never had to advocate for paying Bill Barber. Bill Clark never had to advocate for paying all these guys that are his guys. And,
right.
You know, whether right or wrong, obviously, we've talked a lot about Bob Clark on this show. But I don't understand how you, as an owner, as an organization,
right,
take your franchise icon, like the guy. When you ask an average NHL fan, when you think of the Hurricanes, who do you think of? The first name is Rod Brind'Amour. Like the image of him with the cup over his head. If it's not a statue in Carolina yet, it should be. And
it's really funny because I can turn over my shoulder and I actually have the picture on my wall.
Exactly. And every 4 to 5 years, you drag him through the absolute mud and you make him come beg you to pay his assistants.
I hear you.
And it's crazy to me. And I think he's going to stay. I think he wants to stay there.
Oh, I don't think that's a question.
But man, at a certain point, is it really worth going through all this every 4 years, Ron?
I hear you. Well, and that's what I can't understand is you've got everything lined up the way that you should want it with him, where it's like he loves being there. He says he can't see himself coaching anywhere else.
Right.
And
he's going to take a discount.
Well, and he's not exactly one of these, like, you know, when John Tortorella came to Philly and it's like, well, this is probably the last coaching stop of my career because no kidding. Sure. You're 65 years old. I get it.
Right.
Rod Brind'Amour's not. I think he might be 50.
Okay, sure.
But you know what I'm saying.
He works out like he's 26. So
fair. He's in great shape. I know. But my point is that it's not like he's young on the coaching. Like he's young on the coaching circuit.
Rod is 53, turning 54 this summer. I'm stunned. Okay.
I mean, pretty in shape 53-year-old, right?
Oh man, he's in better shape than I am, and I'm 31. So
but like that's what I'm saying. Like he's young on the coaching circuit in terms of take your pick for what stop you would want. He'd be highly coveted anywhere he went.
Yep, he's young, he's good, he's an absolute god in your market.
Well, that's
what's the problem, man?
Right, and I just don't understand. Well, what I don't understand is in a league and in just a sports environment in general, where coaching changes are so common all the time. It's always the easiest option. It's the coach is gonna go every single time. It doesn't matter what it is. And yet you actually have the scenario lined up. You've got so much going for you. You've got players lined up. You've got the coach lined up. You shouldn't have any issues at this point. You've got a great GM. Everything's lined up. That franchise is set for 5 more. Like if he gets a 5-year contract, if he's doing a new contract, you give him a 5-year contract to stay, right? Yeah. I feel pretty confident in saying you will have a Stanley Cup in Carolina within those 5 years with the way that you are set up.
See, but if you had said that 5 years ago, I would have also agreed with you, and they haven't gotten it yet. So
because of the finickiness of the playoffs, because you run into the Floridas of the world who are on a hot streak, on a magical run, it can go haywire.
But they have built a sustainable, good organization there, and I agree.
Well, here's the thing. Do you know what that sounds like? You're sitting here going, "Oh, I would have told you that 5 years ago too." Yeah, you know what that sounds like though?
Okay.
It sounds like the Flyer teams he used to play on.
You're not wrong.
That they're Final Four material, right? Their conference finals regularly. Well, they're close, but something ends up happening, right?
Man,
but don't you want to be? I've talked about this before. Don't you want to be the team that you go into the year thinking we're built to win a Stanley Cup? We're probably going to get relatively close. Conference finals is always a legitimate target. I would always rather have the conference finals be on the table than be the team that's sitting in the middle all the time.
And here's the other thing to Tom Dundon. Like, I know he's a bit of a cheaper owner, and I know this specifically the ownership before him was pretty cheap as well. Rod's going to get you at least 4, 5, 6, 7 home playoff dates every single year.
You're not wrong.
You don't pay your players for that. That's pure profit. All money in your pocket, my man.
But I think also when you got to think about also you're talking.
He's made his salary for that owner in playoff revenue alone.
You're probably right. But not only that, but it also has to do with you want to attract some names to come in to play for you too.
Guys want to play for Rod Brind'Amour.
Having a guy who's got the reputation that Rod Brind'Amour does helps also. So collectively, you've got this. That's one of those things about this series. So like and that's the thing too, right? Like you want to bring it back to this series.
I do. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying you want to bring it back to this series though. The coaching matchup it's mentor to student. It's, oh, by the way, the coach who was the coach of the champion Carolina Hurricanes when Brind'Amour was the captain of the team is on the other bench.
And by the way, the Flyer connections run deep here on both sides, and it makes me sick. But
I was waiting for we have another Flyer connection series coming up too that we're going to talk about, if you can believe it. But we're going to go there. I'm going to anyway because why not?
And that's before Craig Berube gets hired by the Leafs.
We'll see about that.
Okay, so
we got to hear about Sheldon Keefe first, but we'll get to them later.
Right. Back to this series. Rangers Carolina. Like I said, game 2 is currently ongoing as we speak. What's your pick here? How do you see this series playing out?
I'm going off of what I just said.
Okay.
I say, Carolina is a team that I always feel like is relatively built to get, conference finals. It should always be in the, at least in the picture in some capacity. Yeah. It really should be a goal. You're not wrong. The problem is that the Rangers are really good.
Yeah.
You don't want to get into kind of one of these special teams showdowns too much because I think you're going to get in trouble. If that's the case.
As we've seen already in the playoffs, that's less of a factor as the series goes deep, and I do expect this series to go pretty deep. Like we all know, the refs stop calling stuff.
No. I'm fully expecting it to go. That's totally the case. I think that's the reason.
And you have to commit a misdemeanor to get a minor in game 5, game 6, game 7.
Well, I mean, like we're doing the show as the game is going right now too, and I'm seeing everything that I expect to see from this type of series. Like it is brutally tight. Like, good luck,
Yep. Chirping from both sides, lots of trash talk, lots of physicality.
What I just love is like, you got two rosters that have a lot of skill on them too. Like,
oh yeah.
Like this is, like I said, this is the series we've been waiting for months at this point. And I do have Carolina. I'm going to take Carolina. I'm going to say, like I said, I'm going to say 7 because I just think it's going to come down to that. And that's, look, to me, by the way, that's a super interesting pick because it means Carolina's winning the series in the Garden.
In Game 7. And I love that.
But I think they're built for something like that.
I agree. I think if you can win this game, if you're Carolina, and send it back to Carolina tied at 1, I think you can get the series taken care of in 6. Now, obviously, there's a lot of this game left. I'm not saying you're definitely going to win both games in Carolina. That's not giving the New York Rangers enough credit, and that's not what I'm trying to do.
Oh, goodness, no.
I do think if you had asked me in December, if you told me these two teams were playing, I would have told you the Rangers in 5.
Yeah, that's fair.
But then Frederik Andersen came back and looked great and didn't have to play 60 games this year. I think Frederik Andersen's a real problem. And, like, obviously, I don't necessarily think he's the best goalie in this series because you do have Igor Shesterkin on the other side. And, like,
oh, for sure. No, he's definitely not the best goalie in the series.
Did he win the Vezina last year? Does he have a Vezina?
Shesterkin?
I think he has one, doesn't he?
Shesterkin's got a Vezina. I don't think it was last year.
Okay. But he does have a Vezina. And
wait a minute. Last year the Vezina was Ullmark.
You're right. It might have been the year before that. Maybe it was
Shesterkin has a Vezina
season. Regardless, he's got one.
Right.
But we also haven't seen Frederik Andersen when he only played, I think it was 26 games this regular season. He's probably about as fresh as he's ever been in a postseason. Carolina, I think, plays a better defensive structure than the Rangers do, generally speaking. I think so in the first round, a lot of game 6s and 7s were very low scoring games, 2-1s, 3-2s, stuff like that.
It's actually pretty crazy how, as the series when you get to the series that got longer, when you got to those, every game turned into a 2-1 game pretty much, or less.
And if this series does that, I think that favors Carolina.
Oh, I'm right there with you because the Rangers have to score, I think is the point. You don't want to have to be the team that plays mistake free. You're right.
No, exactly. And I think of the two teams, I think Carolina is more capable of playing mistake free. I do have Carolina. I have Carolina in 6. You said you have Carolina in 7, which, as we've mentioned before, kind of means you can see either team winning it. It is a bit of.
I mean, I'm never gonna put anything past a President's Trophy winner, but I do also think that there's. I just I think I'm right there with you from, like, the way that they've played since, I guess, roughly February on, maybe even mid-January is what we're looking at here with them. Like, they've got that rhythm going right now that I just can't see them falling off a cliff right now.
Yep.
And
they kind of remind me of the Florida Panthers last year.
A little bit. I'm not going to go that far with it because I think they've just been on enough of a run for half of a season to do that.
Yeah, Florida did a little bit of that last year. They had to make up some ground to make the playoffs at the end of the year. They
did, but it wasn't as comfortable as what Carolina got into, where it was like, hey, you're 1-2, and this is the way it is. Like, there's a big difference between what I think about this side of the bracket versus the other side we're gonna get into, because I can't go so far as to say, like, I feel like a cup finalist is coming from one series or the other here. Like,
I agree.
You're going to get a tough matchup the next time around.
The Eastern Conference Final is going to be great no matter who's there.
I just know that from the second that I saw the East side bracket, pretty much, it was pretty easy for me to map the path that Carolina had to at least get to the conference final. At least.
I agree.
I felt like that was exactly the way it was headed. And, I went 8 for 8 in the first round here. I'm going at some point in time, I'm going to say something that's going to be wrong here because these are way closer. Like, I'm pretty sure, we probably had at least 2, maybe 3 layups here when it came down to it. to get 3 out of whatever.
You went 8 for 8. I went 7 for 8. A lot of people had a pretty high success rate with this year's first round.
Yeah, I would say
we kind of knew how it was going to go.
Well, yeah. So
with a couple exceptions,
right? So my point with that is that, like, as much as I see a certain matchup coming here, and I'm going to stick to what I went with pre-series, obviously. As much as I'm going to do that, look, there's nothing that would come out of a potential Eastern Conference final that would surprise me. Nothing at this point.
I agree. All right, so that I think is a good spot on this matchup here. We do have one more match. Yep, we do have one more matchup in the Eastern Conference. It is the Atlantic Division matchup. Just kind of how we got here real quick. I think we start with Florida because, man, we talk about a passing of the baton in Florida. And
yeah,
I think we kind of just saw it. I don't know if John Cooper will be let go.
I doubt it.
I agree. But I think this is kind of the end of the road for the Tampa Bay Lightning as they currently sit. Obviously, there are lots of questions around Steven Stamkos and his future.
I
think it's going to be difficult for them to kind of bounce back, and they're going to have to change more than just subtract Steven Stamkos, add another player in that caliber. I think they're going to have to do some real roster work to turn their team around a little bit.
And you got to, I've talked about the mileage that some of those big guns that they have gotten over the years.
Yep.
Because
Hedman has just played
right. I'm lumping Hedman into it. That's exactly where my head was
so many minutes.
Because
Andrei Vasilevsky's 30 years old, but he's played enough hockey that he might as well be 40.
Yeah, I mean, he's played a lot. Look, I don't think it comes down to being on him either. They had some injuries in the back end. They played a game in Philly this year where they had 3, maybe 4 defensemen. I don't even know if I could tell you where they came from. Like, they were so depleted on the back end when, like, this was at a time when Sergachev was out, Chernak was out. They had a couple others who were battling something too, I think. Yeah. It was just like, it was a lot. And look, full marks, by the way, to Mikhail Sergachev for coming back and trying to play.
Insane.
What was he? 7 weeks?
80 days after he broke his tibia and his fibula.
Right.
He's playing NHL playoff games.
So basically
79 days after he got surgery.
Right.
For those injuries.
It was insane.
Lunacy. Absolute lunacy. And the kind of thing, frankly, that I don't think they should have done, because if you need to transition, he's a good kind of future guy, and it's the kind of thing that can just be so incredibly
I know,
risky.
but the problem is that it's also the danger of when you're clinging on to what's left of a core,
Exactly. And I think that's kind of where the Lightning are at, is that you won 2 cups in a row, you made 3 cup finals in a row, you mortgaged the future to do it, because that's what you have to do in today's NHL, right? Like, they've traded first, seconds, and thirds for Tanner Jeannot. They've traded first, seconds, and thirds, like, just up and down. They've traded all of their picks. They have no prospects at all.
Yeah, because you don't have a choice. Exactly.
Exactly.
Like, when you're going to go for it, you're going to go for it. And now
when you've won 2 cups in a row, what are you supposed to do? Not go for the third?
Well, exactly. And the other part of the equation is, see, to me, what they actually have to do more of is when you go back to the drafting board and you've got to find the next big thing.
You got to get your scouts going.
Well, you're trying to find, if you're wondering what's next for Steven Stamkos, you're looking for your next kind of Braden Point in the mix of this thing. Yes. You're not going to get the first overall pick, so you're going to have to find it somewhere in the middle. So you're going to have to get a guy like that.
And those guys don't fall out of the sky even for the best.
But let's not take away from the fact, like, as much as there's mileage on a lot of this core, and Stamkos is older and Hedman's older, like, you might need to find that next defenseman. And maybe you're right. Maybe Sergachev's one of those guys. I mean, he could just very well be the guy who becomes the natural successor of the whole thing.
He probably should be. Yeah.
But you probably want to find a guy, right? Like, you want to find another one of those guys somewhere in the picture. But you do still have Point at a prime age. You have Kucherov, who's a Hart Trophy candidate, nominee, finalist, however you want to look at it.
He is a finalist. Yep.
Right. And like, it's not like you're bereft of talent just because the core seems like it's going to change direction. I think the bigger thing is potentially separating yourself from some of those guys. understanding when it's time, right? Like,
do you move, for example, a Brandon Hagel?
That's not even like a big issue to me. It's
okay.
It's when it's do you try to bring back and to be fair, one of the other teams we're going to talk about in the other series of this matchup is that this is what the Boston Bruins did when it came to Patrice Bergeron, for example.
Yep.
It's how long do you hold on to that? And in some cases, I get it. Like, believe me, I think it would be really hard to picture Steven Stamkos playing anywhere else. And if Stamkos is willing to stick around and not make the kind of money that Steven Stamkos could make, then I could understand it a little bit. But you do have to be level with yourself on, listen, at his age, is this something you want to do? Right? Like, you have to be mindful of it. You can't just assume that it's always going to be the same thing. And Stamkos played a pretty high level series. He had a good series.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's not that at all. It's just
it's his age and the number he's going to want.
No, and it's how much longer can you do this before you're trading away? You know, you can't constantly trade away first round picks and then say, you know, when the time comes, let's just pivot back. You need to have a contingency plan.
Well, and I think the bill has come due a little bit for them, and you know, this season and next off season I think are going to be interesting.
And in the meantime, to shift to the other team in this.
Well, right, and Florida,
that team just looks motivated from last year.
We all saw what Florida did in the playoffs last year. We all saw what putting Nick Cousins and Matthew Tkachuk on the ice, you know, in a playoff series can do to another team. And last year we watched them come back on the Boston Bruins. We'll get to them in a second here.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically steamroll everyone else all the way to the final. And this team has picked up right where last year's team left off. And they're going to be a problem. And you have, well, in round one, you had good Sergei Bobrovsky.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you need sometimes. When you have a decent team in front of, right, when you have a good team in front of them, sometimes it's just a goalie. And man, that leads really nicely into the other team in this matchup, because I think the Boston Bruins are a decent team. Obviously, they've taken a step back. You know, Bergeron and Krejci swapped out for Coyle and who was the other center?
Pavel
Zacha, getting the same number of points as Bergeron and Krejci last year, which is hilarious.
More they by the end of the year.
But I think
it's insane.
I think they are a reasonable team. I think they're solid. But man, Jeremy Swayman looks good.
Yeah. I mean,
Jeremy Swayman looks really good. And like,
well, listen, when you also think about the fact that when it really comes down to it, so Boston's leading that series 3-1 against Toronto. And the final score of the next three games is collectively 2-1 across the board. So Swayman gives up 2, 2, and 1 in the final three games. That
one of which went to overtime.
Right. That despite the fact that it goes to 7 games after they led 3-1 in the series, he's given up next to nothing the whole game.
And they never considered for a second going to Ullmark, because like they rotated.
Nor should they.
Right, because they rotated. I think it was like the last 27 or 28 games of the season where it was a true tandem.
Well, and in fairness, that's how they started the series in 1 and 2. It was that way too, and that was totally the right move. Yep. And as soon as you took game
Austin
3,
Matthews lit Ullmark up like a Christmas tree and then got sick.
Well, maybe more than that, but
well, I mean that's where it all started. The illness after game 2.
To miss 2 potential elimination games, and by the way,
by that time he was injured.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Right. Well, I'm saying after game 2, he got very, very ill.
Oh, I know.
He was very sick for game 3, got hurt in game 4, ended up missing 5 and 6.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Toronto's a mess.
Well, and here, do you know something interesting? Because I know that there's a lot of talk about the core and all that stuff, right? And there's going to be. I get it. The one guy who I don't have any questions about.
Nylander?
Yeah, because he was all over the place for the last 2-3 games of the series. He was brilliant.
He didn't play the first 4 because of debilitating migraines. And by the way, if you don't have migraines, don't question it. They suck real bad. So he doesn't play the first 4 games due to migraines.
I mean, he's single-handedly your offense in game 6.
And also game 7.
Well, I'm getting there because
Right.
the problem with the game 7-1 is that you don't end up winning the game. You needed another contribution somewhere. And I mean,
Sure.
listen, I will throw in the fact that from game 5 that Matthew Nye's having the overtime winner in that one and being a presence in that respect, you know,
that's huge for him moving forward.
He
in
hasn't
his
been, but this is exactly where I'm getting at with this is
Yep.
he hasn't really had this kind of, like, I know he played last year. I'm not saying that, but it's like,
sure.
but I'm saying, like, he's not really part of this core picture the way that others are in this thing.
Are right.
Right. And well, I just can't see, like, it's not even that I just can't see, because that's not the way this is going to work at all. Like, they're not going to be able to easily change the course of this thing because everybody's got no movement clauses.
Yeah, no move clause is suggestion. Well, let's be honest.
No, I hear you. I'm not. Listen, I'm not going to tell you who I don't like, who I think they should explore doing this with.
Marner's gone. Tavares might get bought out. Like,
here's the thing: if Tavares gets bought out, then that's just an admission of a massive mistake.
But is it though? I mean, he signed a 7-year deal. You buy him out for the last year.
Oh, is that really what it's up to already?
He's only got 1 year left. No, he's only got 1 year left.
Oh, it doesn't feel like there's only 1 year left.
Yeah, it's because COVID happened in the meantime.
Okay, see, I didn't think about all that. All right,
he signed it, I think, 2018.
I can't, from their vantage point, I don't know how you can justify paying Marner what he's going to want to be paid for that next
Marner.
There's just, I'm sorry, he's not that kind of player. We were texting back and forth about this, and I called him an elite sidekick because to me, I don't know how he's ever going to be the guy. He can be a great compliment to Matthews, and he can be a great compliment to Nylander, but I just don't know how he's going to be the guy. He's had more than enough opportunities in playoff series like this to be the guy. And
the thing about sidekicks is they can't make more than
he's going
8 or 9 in today's NHL.
Well, beyond that, he's
already making 10.5, and he's not taking a pay cut.
No, and you can't ask him to make more than ask him to make more than Austin Matthews at that point.
Austin Matthews is about to be making 13. He won't be making more than Austin.
No,
Matthews.
but to me, like, Nylander should be making more than Marner should.
I don't disagree with you, and I think a lot of Toronto fans.
And it's not going to be that way when the next contract rolls around. That's the thing, right?
You know how many goals Mitch Marner has from game 5 of a playoff series onward in his career?
Is it 0?
1.
Okay.
And it was in, I think, 2018.
It's just one of these things that kind of not blows my mind, but it's just like, I don't understand how you can keep rolling this out there like they are it's the definition of insanity, right? You expect different results from doing the same thing.
Well, and I think so. Obviously, they have a lot more talent than the Philadelphia Flyers have. I don't think that's up for debate. But I think from an organizational standpoint, they're in a very similar position to where the Flyers were 16 months ago.
Well, the first step to correcting a problem is admitting you have a problem. Exactly.
Well, and it's not your coach, although I don't know if the coach was great. It's not even your general manager. Like, Brad Treliving made some good moves this year.
Treliving is relatively new.
Well, right. And Max Domi might have been their best player in that over the course of that whole series. By the end of it, he was their first line center. I think the problem, and I think a lot of Toronto fans will tell you this, I don't think I'm alone here. Your problem is Brendan Shanahan. Because
that's fair.
They know factually he has trade veto power and has used it in the past. It is heavily speculated that Dubas was fired last year because he wanted to trade Marner before Marner's no move clause kicked in, and Shanahan kiboshed that. I don't know if so. They have a press availability scheduled for Friday. You may be listening to the show after that. If Brendan Shanahan makes it through that press conference with his job, and I believe he's going to, because otherwise they wouldn't trot him out in front of the media.
I don't think so. Yeah.
I think that they're just kind of doomed to repeat this cycle until that changes.
Well, so it goes back to the conversation about the Tampa Bay Lightning for a second too, where it's like, listen, when you win, like the Lightning have, you went back-to-back cups, you go to a third cup final in a row. There's an element of it where you've got this core around that has done something very successful for you. And it's hard to part ways with it because you grip onto the memory of what you had, right? You grip onto they've achieved success. The fans are attached to them, everything like that. Like, this is a little bit less than that. Like, there's an element where you can hold on for too long because you've won with them. And it's like, listen, we've won with them before. You feel like you got it. Like, they're always going to be part of the family. You know,
Sure.
That's the way that it is, right? You take that part away and, you know, where you don't win. And what if you still do the same thing? And you still grab hold and you hold on. Isn't that what everybody accused the Flyers of for so long with with Claude Giroux, Jake Voracek, Wayne Simmons? Like, how many years in a row are we going to keep putting the same guys out there to try to make something different happen? And it's not resulting in what you want, you know?
Exactly.
And at what point in time is it too late down the line to cut ties and to do what you got to do? Right.
If you just signed Austin Matthews to a 5-year extension,
right.
If you want to have a shot at winning, and I think Nylander signed an 8-year.
Yeah, Nylander did.
If you want to have a chance of turning those guys into cup winners in your city, something's got to change, man.
Sure, absolutely, 1,000%. And sometimes you're exactly right. Sometimes that's got to come from the top. Like, it's not going to be the GM because that's too new of a change. It's either got to be Shanahan at the top or like they're still going to end up. Look, I still think they're going to end up making a coaching change because after a year of this, Treliving now gets possibly the chance to do his part on this, which would be fair, honestly. Like, sometimes you give it a shot. All right, like to be fair too, by the way, and I want to go back to the part where the series was 3-1, by the way, because up to that point they did exactly what I said. They did exactly what I said would get Sheldon Keefe fired.
Oh, and game 4
they trotted out Ilya Samsonov, who was not the better goalie, and full marks to Samsonov for playing a really good game 7.
Yeah, unexpectedly too.
Right.
Yeah,
You can argue that he should make the save on the Hampus Lindholm game tying goal. I understand.
You should argue that he poke checks the Pasternak winning. Mm-hmm.
I hear you. But my point being, up to that point, what happens after the fact? They go to Joseph Wall for the game 5 and game 6, and he looks brilliant. Are they winning that series if he's the guy in goal for the whole thing? It's possible.
Maybe
it's possible. And I mean, is there a chance they win game 7 if he doesn't try to make a desperation save that's meaningless with a second left in a 2-0 game? He hurts himself.
Yep. Painful.
Right? Like, who knows what happens if that's the case? And because of something like that, it changes the entire trajectory of things. Like, I'm thinking you're getting to a point where with Sheldon Keefe as your coach, you know, I'm going, you know, it's interesting because here's your transition to the two teams that are still playing. Who's the coach of the Florida Panthers who in his last stop turned around and said, I can't get them any further? I don't know if you're going any further with Sheldon Keefe.
Well, and one more, I do want to draw one more comparison to the Flyers of 16 months ago.
Okay.
I think, so John Tortorella was your new coach, and he was the fiery new guy. So he wasn't going to get fired during this big overhaul.
Right.
I think that's Brad Treliving in Toronto. But everyone else, I think you're in Toronto, your coach and your president of hockey ops should be gone. In Philadelphia, your general manager and your president of hockey ops were gone.
Right.
The other similarity, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment has a new president, Keith Pelly, who is a lifelong fan. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
Okay. Either way, we will see. The other team in this matchup, the Boston Bruins. Now, before the season, I think a lot of people, ourselves included, thought that this was the year that the Boston Bruins were going to fall off. And then through the first 60 games, they were leading. Through the first 78 games, through the first 79 games, they were leading the division, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
last couple days of the season, they definitely intentionally lost so that they could play the Leafs in the first round. That worked. They did so, and they let the Leafs leave.
Not wrong.
I think Jeremy Swayman was absolutely the best Boston Bruin in the first round. I don't think it's particularly close. Like you said, they benched him for game 2, and Ullmark, that was the first game they lost out of that first 4. And then games 5, 6, and 7, like you said, he allowed 2, 2, and 1.
Yeah, I mean, he was flat out brilliant.
He's got like a 965 or something like that, and that's absurd. It's absurd. You've played 7 playoff games and you're above 960.
I know.
Get out of my face.
Yeah, I know, right? I know it's nuts.
The Bruins will go as far as Jeremy Swayman takes them, and man, I predicted the Panthers, and I'm gonna stick with that prediction.
I know, but
I will not be very surprised if the Boston Jeremy Swaymans end up winning this playoff series.
Here's the thing, and this goes as recently as watching Game 1, and I picked the Panthers as well.
Yep, the Bruins did win Game 1.
What did you have for games in that, by the way? Did you do 6 or 7?
I believe I had it in 7.
I did write it down.
I had it in 6. I was gonna say I actually have Twitter up here, so I had.
You did 6.
I did do 6. Okay, so I had Florida in 6, and Jeremy Swayman's making me forget that.
Well, I had Florida in 7, so I definitely saw a series here, and see, on one hand. And I was ready to buy into this a little bit because as I'm watching the final games that they had against Toronto, I'm like, these teams are going to be spent. Whoever it is, it doesn't matter. You know, Toronto's going to have burned every ounce of energy that they have coming back from down 3-1 if they make it. Right. So they're going to get probably demolished by Toronto or by Florida. Boston's a little, I'm not going to dismiss, and this might be where my 7 comes from. I'm not dismissing the revenge factor.
Oh, no. Absolutely
that's a very big part of this. And I believe that was an ESPN game last night, I believe. Correct? For Game 1. Yeah. So I think Ray Ferraro is the one who said this then. I think that's who had. No, they didn't have that game. What am I saying? It was the other crew. So Ryan Callahan.
Oh, okay.
But either way, it was brought up toward the end that now it's like Game 2 for Florida is a must. Oh, can you imagine going back to Boston down 2-0?
Yeah, all they have to do is split at that point, and it's 3-1, and Jeremy Swayman can steal you any of the last 3 games.
I hear you, and that's the thing. Believe me, more than ever right now, I see a path. Oh, do I see a path for them?
Oh, absolutely. And, like I said, I'm sticking with my prediction because, I predicted Florida before the series, but if you asked me to put money on it right now, I would not be putting money on the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, it's a very interesting series from here. And I mean, Swayman is the biggest factor of this because the more he does what he's been doing and keeps them hanging around in games like that, especially during, this is a game where nothing had happened score-wise for a while.
Yep.
And I'm watching as the shot totals were going up for one team in bunches. It started off, Florida had all the shots in the beginning of the game. And then here comes Boston with their amount of shots. Florida comes closer to even in and back out. Second period starts. I think it was Florida again. They get off to the good start. Boston evens it back out. Florida scores first. Here comes Boston. 3 goals before the period's over. All of it. And that's, if you've got a goalie, and that's not a knock on Bobrovsky at all, but if you've got a goalie who can handle that, handle the fact that for a couple of minutes in bunches, it's going to be a shooting gallery. That's the one thing I will say is that, and it's funny because this was the first game in a while, I think, that felt like, oh, you know what? This is not that it turned into anyway. This is not that super low scoring game. Somebody's going to score. And shot totals were ramped up.
Yep.
And that was the other thing. So you're going to need to be the team with the best goalie to win this series probably.
Well, and it's the same thing I said about the other series. And quite frankly, I think I'm going to use it as my metric kind of evaluating all these series.
Mm-hmm. As
the series goes deeper, which team is more likely to play mistake-free hockey? And in this series,
now, it's Boston.
Think it's Boston. Boston.
Right now it is. Until something about that changes. And
Brandon Carlo's playing with that new dad energy.
Yeah, I hear
Justin Brazeau might be the best 4th-line center in the league.
You're going off of him right now. Mason Lowry going bar down.
Mason Lowry, they're getting contributions
top to bottom. Man, I know
from guys you've never heard of.
Right.
If I asked you in late January who Justin Brazeau is, there's no shot you would have known. And I wouldn't have either. I'm not
right.
like,
No.
nobody did.
He played a couple of games when the Flyers were playing Boston in March, and that was kind of my first exposure to him.
Exactly.
I had a little bit more of a knowledge of Lowry because I think he had played a handful of preseason games, so I remember seeing him in the preseason, and that was at least it was a little bit of enough for me,
right?
To remember. I mean, Lowry can move. By the way, he's a really good skater.
Oh yeah, man. Yep.
So that's the first step of the whole thing.
That whole team is full of good skaters. But
this was my thing going back to the draft. They just find guys.
Yep.
It's not complicated. You want to be a successful franchise, find guys. That's how it works. Like, do your job, find guys, right? Like, it's not crazy.
No, not at all. And and I think, man, I think the next team we're going to talk about
I did say my pick, right?
You had Florida in 7, right? Yeah.
All right.
I had Florida 6.
As confident as we feel after game 1.
Oh, listen, we're about to transition over to the Western Conference.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about a team who could find guys. Okay, you ready? All right. We'll be back in just a second. We're going to take another quick break here. Just hitting the break real quick. Make sure to follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. All right, stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, and we are back with our Western Conference preview, recap, playoff summary, whatever you want to call this episode here. The first matchup we're going to start with out west is the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche.
So we're going to start with so we got to do how we got here first, right?
Yes. So starting with how we got here.
Why don't we do Colorado first? Because that's the quicker one.
That's easy. Right. Colorado takes
it
care
almost
of Winnipeg.
Wasn't easy.
No, absolutely.
After game 1, I wasn't convinced, to be honest. That was a weird and wild game 1 that I kind of thought meant we were going to get a weird and wild series. And then, but then the Colorado Avalanche showed up.
Exactly. And I'm talking the theme of the day is, mistake-free hockey and who's going to play the mistake-free hockey. And as the series went on, Colorado showed that playoff resilience. They showed that they've been there before. And Winnipeg just could never lock it down. Like,
what the big thing to me was?
Okay.
So after game 1 of that series, there were a ton of questions about Alexander Georgiev and like what's the deal with the goaltending in Colorado and all stuff like that.
Can't go to Justus Annunen because he's sick, and there's all sorts of nonsense.
Winnipeg scored 7 goals in game 1.
Yep.
And then from there 2, 1, and 3. So they scored 8 in the final 4 games after scoring 7 in game 1.
Yep.
I think Georgiev did a much better job of locking that one down from there.
Well, and I think the team realized they needed to play lockdown a little bit better.
Well, I'm sure
in game 1.
But I think the other big thing is that, let's be real, you've got the likely Vezina Trophy winner on the other side of this matchup.
Yep.
And Colorado flat out dummied this team.
Well, and I think they scored 11 or 12 screen tip goals. Like the big stat coming out of that series.
You got to be talking about the
Colorado generating traffic.
Oh yeah. I'm saying you got to be talking about the number of times that Rantanen got a tip or Nichushkin got a tip, and it's like, and they're their net front guys anyway. So it's
I think it was something like 11 or 12 screened and tipped goals in that series. And Connor Hellebuck even said after the series, he goes, I thought I was playing really good hockey. I just couldn't see anything.
It's fair.
The pucks were by him before he even noticed.
Well, the other interesting part is that so you had that first win that they get, the 5-2 win in game 2.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of role players. The goal scoring is role players. I mean, Zach Parise scores your game winner.
Well, that's
Miles Woods. Miles Woods playing the game.
Yeah, your big guys were focused on neutralization. So that allowed your depth to shine.
They are, but I'm going to give a quick tip too, because Josh Manson had the 4th goal of that game, and that's just a great read by McKinnon, who is your big guy, obviously.
Who's ridiculous, right?
Right. But as it started to shift to, look at this game 3 box score with 5 goals in the 3rd period for the Avalanche, and it was just one after the other. And it's McKinnon, Nichushkin, Lehkonen, Ross Colton scores a goal. Then they get an empty netter from Devon Taves, and it's just collectively, but you look at that stretch too, and it was power plays, or they were just lighting it up that night. in terms of what they were able to do. And it just continued that way. Like they didn't, this is what I'm saying. They didn't just win games like 5-2, 6-2, 5-1, 6-3. These were lopsided. This was way more lopsided a series than it appeared to be. And that's what makes me have a thought about the matchup we're going to get into, because let's go to the series that got Dallas here first, and then we can get into what I'm thinking about this round 2 matchup. But
I would like to take some credit here.
Okay. What credit?
I said Dallas and Vegas was going to be the best matchup in the first series, and oh man, was I correct. That series was incredible.
I was sitting there watching
high quality hockey for 7 games.
I was sitting there watching game 2 and watching as Vegas was basically doing it again, right? Like there's no other way around that. And thinking, I don't know if this is going to work out the way that I thought. I've got this Dallas team going all the way. And I said that last week.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh no, is it possible they don't even make it out of the first round? They're even worse than that. They're going to overtime in game 3 in Vegas. Oh no, like they could be on the verge of getting swept. This team that I had, like that I thought out of all of the West teams was probably playing the best as the playoffs started, is going to possibly bow out way earlier than I anticipate. And I'm going to give a shout out to the guy who I think turned this whole thing, or started the turnaround anyway.
Wow.
Because this is,
I talked about leading into our Western Conference preview. I talked about a team that was finding guys, and man, Dallas found some guys.
Yeah, I'm going to mention one of them right here for you, because he got
Is it the guy who's currently their Conn Smythe leader?
I mean, unless somehow or other you have the Conn Smythe leader being the goalie, which is always a viable option.
Jake Ottinger's been good, but no.
No, it's the guy who scored the overtime winner in game 3, I'm going to guess. It's Wyatt Johnston, isn't it?
Wyatt Johnston is stupid.
Yeah. You know what else is also kind of stupid about this too?
That he's 21, that he's 20.
Sure, that's part of it. Having a guy who also has next to no experience, like Logan Stankoven, who is like showing up like I've been here all along.
We've been talking for 2-3 years now about how the Dallas Stars have transitioned from Ben Sagan to this next generation so seamlessly, so efficiently. Their defensive core boasts both Ryan Suter and also Miro Heiskanen. And like that tells you all you need to know.
You've got Ryan Suter on the back end, and in the forward core, you've got Sagan, Ben, and Joe Pavelski, who, like, Pavelski's a Hall of Famer. Like,
first,
you know what I mean? Like, let's be real, Ben's probably got a case as well.
And Sagan, if Sagan gets a ring,
too.
he's there too. Yeah.
I know. I'm not trying to take anything away from Sagan either. I know. I'm just saying.
Yeah, man, I feel so bad with how hard Tyler Sagan's fallen off the last couple of years based on where he was. But you take
these 3 guys who have a role in this whole thing, and then you go to everything like it actually was a little surprising. Once this thing got to game 7, by the way, it was actually a little bit surprising to me in a way that you look up and the game-winning goal is Radek Faksa. Like, Radek Faksa a few years ago was, I believe, in their top 6.
Yeah.
Now he's their 4th line center, right? Like,
yeah, but because everything around him has just filled with the Jason Robertsons and the Wyatt Johnstons and all these guys that have just made their way into the lineup, the Logan Stankovens, like all these guys that have made their way into the lineup and just made an impact.
The game that they win at home, the first game they win at home to get the series lead, that they're 3rd in a row after, game 5. This is what's stupid to me. The first goal of that game, they tie the game up after, of all things, by the way, too. So Mark Stone scored the very first goal of the series right on cue. Right on cue. And so the series goes back to Dallas, tied 2-2. So far, no home team has won a game.
Right.
If you can believe that. You know, two environments.
By the way, it was Stone from Hannafin, which is even funnier. That first goal in the series.
So Dallas ties the game right back up. And it's Evgeny Dadonov from Stankoven and Johnston. Now,
62 seconds later.
Those 3 on a line together is ridiculous.
Correct.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like you have them. You got, you go to a power play later.
Because
It's got Sagan, Johnston, and Duchesne on it.
right. Right.
Jason,
Because
and
Evgeny Dadonov is definitely on this line with Stankoven and Ryan Johnson doing the hello, fellow children. Like,
right.
he is.
But
he's
but that's the beauty of it. Is like they've got such a, that's the beauty of it, is that they've got like this grouping of lines, because generally speaking, like that's not even, because I mentioned Johnston as part of that, like getting an assist on that. That's not even his line. Right. He's normally out there with Robertson, and I think with Rope Hintz, I think is the other part of that equation. Okay. Or it's either that or he's out there with oh goodness, who else would he be out there with? Because I think he's a center actually. Wyatt Johnson is, because Robertson's a winger. So Robertson's a natural winger. Because Rope Hintz, we've had multiple conversations about him being one of these two-way guys who absolutely deserves
long-time listeners know I love me some Rope Hintz. Wyatt Johnson is centering Jamie Benn and Joe Pavelski, which is hilarious.
Well, they keep changing it, is my point. Like they rotate these lines because Johnston's been out there regularly with Robertson at times.
Right. And just according to what Daily Faceoff has right now, that means your third line. That means your third line is Duchesne centering Dadonov and Sagan, and that is hilarious.
Well, here's the thing. That's a great team, and this is why it's a great, because if you can shuffle your lines around based on maybe no, we're going to do this instead, despite everything you saw in the first series, because we need to do it this way to play this team. That's how you've got a great team. If you can shuffle the lines around to be like, no, we're going to build it this way this time because this isn't Vegas anymore. We got to do this for Colorado now. So now, nope, we're not putting Johnson up there with Robertson. We can't do that this time. We got to split them up, and we're going to do it this way instead.
Yep.
Only the great teams are going to be able to do that.
Right. And oh, by the way, their defense also includes Thomas Harley and Chris Tanev, who somehow we haven't mentioned up to this point in time.
The evolution of what Harley's become has been just remarkable for them. There's another find for you, right?
Find a guy. They have found guys. And I think Thomas Harley was a first-round pick, so I don't know how much of a find it is, but
depends. Well, it depends on where it is, though, because like to me, like, sure, listen, Miro Heiskanen being a third overall pick, that's a little bit easier. I get that,
right? But
like, you get into those territories, like Jason Robertson's obviously a find.
Harley was 18th overall in 2019.
That to me is a find, though. That means you got him when you were a playoff team.
Yeah, that's fair. That's valid.
Like that's all I'm trying to get at is that I don't want to hear this.
There are good players to be found in that range of the draft.
Yeah, that's all I'm trying to get at with that type of stuff, is that if you're going to pick guys at different spots in the lineup, like you go through some of them too. Like that's why we're now I get it. Wyatt Johnston was drafted in a year, and Stankoven for that matter, both drafted in a year where it was like, okay, everything was weird. Johnston didn't play near as much because of all the COVID restrictions.
Scouting's funky.
So he might have slipped as a result. Hindsight being a little different or whatever, but like, what's your excuse for Thomas Harley?
Right.
A guy who goes 18th overall in 2019. What's the excuse there?
Right. That was a normal year.
You got a guy who developed really well. I mean, look at who first round pick was the year before that. They had Ty Dellandrea, who's got a role on this team.
Yep.
13th overall. Doesn't mean he's a star, but he doesn't have to be.
Well, he is a star, but
yeah, I knew you were going to.
They're all stars.
Hey, and sometimes and sometimes you've got to do what they did with the goalie, also, where it's you take a chance on a goalie in the first round, and Ottinger was going to be that good.
And man, he has proven that correct. All right, let's get a pick here, and then we have one more series to get to.
This was the interesting part, though. So as much as we can rave about the Dallas Stars finding guys all we want to, the team that's coming into this series on a hotter streak is Colorado.
Yeah,
there's no way around it. You don't score whatever number of goals it was by the time all was said and done. It was 5 or 6 every game.
You decimated the Jets.
Right. You don't score 5 or 6 a game against a team like Winnipeg and Connor Hellebuck and not come in with some momentum.
Sure.
That's got me worried, to be honest, because I'm going to pick Dallas in 7 because Dallas is my cup pick.
Yeah.
So I'm sticking with that because I got to give them a path to get there. And as long as they're alive, I'm going to pick them.
Absolutely.
But that is exactly the reason I'm afraid of this because, and here's the deal. I'm going to say something based off of, I said I couldn't say this about the other bracket, the other side of the bracket. So I'm going to say it for this one.
Yeah.
The team going to the Cup final is coming out of this series.
I think you're probably correct.
Like if Dallas wins it, I think Dallas is good enough and they'll end up in the Cup final. If it's Colorado, I think Colorado is poised to go back.
Oh, for sure. I also have Dallas in this series. I also have 7 games, and you and I both, again, have mentioned that means anybody could win, right? You come down to a game 7, and it could be anything. And that game will be in Dallas.
I know.
And that might make the difference. Honestly, giving Pete DeBoer less change in game 7 might be the difference in this series. That's how close it is.
It could. Yeah, I mean, everything could be a difference maker. Like there's an element to me where I sit there and I go back to that game 1 that Winnipeg won, scoring 7, and I go, that might mean I give a goaltending edge to Dallas in that case because I think Ottinger's the better goalie than Georgiev is.
Oh, well, I give Dallas the goaltending edge in this series, and I think that is the difference in the series because
it's a big deal. Yeah,
obviously Colorado's D-core is very, very talented. No one's taking that away from them. They might have the best D-core 1 through 6 in the National Hockey League to the point where they traded away Bowen Byram this year because of just the excess.
I know.
But defensively,
and they're still loaded.
But defensively speaking, I think Dallas might have the better unit. And Cale Makar is a better defenseman than Miro Heiskanen. I'm not questioning that. But defensively speaking, I think Miro Heiskanen is very, very good, and I think they are very close.
This is the interesting part about what you're trying to say, too, because I kind of agree with it. I think when you look at the forward position and defense, for that matter, Colorado's got the better individuals in terms of like in terms of Dallas doesn't have a guy that I think levels up to Nathan MacKinnon. They don't. But they've got guys who are really good, but they don't have a Nathan MacKinnon, and they don't, as good as Miro Heiskanen is, he's not Cale Makar. So that's where Colorado is going to have a little bit of an edge. But
I think 1 through 19.
But Ottinger's better than Georgiev, and that's also a balancing act.
Right. Well, and I think 1 through 19, right? You have your 18 skaters and your starting goalie, who in most playoff series, it's kind of just the one goalie. So 1 through 19, I think Dallas is stronger.
Well, and you got to ask yourself the question also when it comes down to that kind of goaltending question also is, we raved about Wyatt Johnston in round 1. How much more of a star can he become in round 2 if he starts having a series? You know what I mean? Like if you start delivering to that level, I know I'm trying to sit here and be like, oh, they don't have anybody on Nathan MacKinnon's level, and they don't, not on paper. Like there's no way around that.
I agree.
And I think, Jason Robertson's a great player and Johnston's turning into a really great player. I'm not taking anything away from those guys. It's just, I'm looking at that and I'm going, you're not going to be Nathan MacKinnon right now. There's no way. No. But maybe we see signs that they've got guys who can be on that level, and that can make a difference too. Like if somebody steps up and just has a killer series, they step up and have a killer series.
Absolutely. I think Colorado has a 10 and 2 9.5s in MacKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar. I think Dallas has 7 or 8 8.5s.
I mean, and Nichushkin's been no slouch in these playoffs either.
Of course, and he's probably
I hear you. I'm throwing out guys because
But I think top to bottom, if you rated everybody on a scale of 1 to 10 and added the number up, I think Dallas comes in just a little bit higher.
Well, I'm throwing out there also. We're doing this whole thing. We got Carolina Rangers going on right now. We watched the Boston Florida game 1 already.
Bryce Harper's hitting dingers.
Well, I'm not worried about that part. But like, don't get me wrong. These games have been really good so far. This is without question. This is a series I'm most excited to watch. Without question, it feels like the 2 most evenly matched teams you're going to get, and that's really hard to say when you've got Rangers Hurricanes. And
I really do have Rangers Hurricanes there, but I think this is a close second. Like I do this when I said my statement about that being the best matchup of the first round series. This is the other series that gave me pause on that.
Well, here, you know what? Here's my counter to what you're saying a little bit, because I kind of agree. I kind of agree with what you're saying based on what we were seeing going into the playoffs and how we kind of had that other matchup penciled in from the beginning, obviously.
Right.
I had my doubts about Colorado a little bit. So I had that last series going 7.
Right.
Because I really did have doubts about the way Colorado was playing right as the playoffs were getting started. Their first round has changed my mind so much that now I'm going, oh boy, the offensive juggernaut's back.
I think
like,
that's
holy crap, they're back in a big time way. And now I'm like looking at that and I'm going, you got the team that I think is most built to win right now, like that's most built to win a cup this year, and a team that is firing on all cylinders, and I cannot wait for this.
Right. And game 1 of that will be tonight after Carolina Rangers, after we're recording here. So again,
literally as I'm uploading this, I'm going to have it on.
A lot of this could look silly because, game 1.
Yeah, we said 7 games.
Right. Of course.
I'm not worried about what happens in game 1.
Of course, we both have this series going 7. We both have Dallas. We have one more matchup to talk about here, and we've been talking a lot. We've been on this, almost 2 hours in right now. We haven't even really mentioned the best player on planet Earth.
I know,
and
who sure looked like it.
He sure did. Through 5 games, we're going to start with Edmonton and LA here. Mm-hmm. Through 5 games, Connor McDavid has 12 points.
He does, but
hello.
I know. Like, here's the thing. I know he does. I feel like we need to talk about the goal scorer of the whole team, though, too. Like, we got to talk about how Zach Hyman's got 7 goals in that round.
I mean, he put up 50 something in the regular season. Like,
no, I know, but that's
surprising.
Oh no. I'm just saying, like, I want to give Connor McDavid his flowers, like always, because he is the best player in the world.
And why does Zach Hyman have 7 goals?
Because good luck covering McDavid and Draisaitl, and then you got a third guy to pay attention to. Good luck with that power play.
Right, and not taking anything away from Zach Hyman, of course. Like,
no, Hyman was doing it at even strength too.
Right. No goal in the NHL is easy to score, but playing with Connor McDavid sure helps. If the Steve Dangle podcast, when reviewing this series, had something interesting, and I think you'll get a kick out of it too.
Okay.
If I told you before the series that game 4 was going to be 1-0 in Los Angeles, who would you guess won that game?
Probably LA. Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
I did not expect. So game 1, 7-4, Edmonton wins. That tracks. Game 2, 5-4, LA squeaks by. Okay, maybe a little bit surprising there. Game 3, the Edmonton scores 6. Okay, sure, they're up 2-1 in the series. If I had told you game 4 was going to be a lockdown game with only 1 goal scored, there is no way on planet Earth you would have told me that the Edmonton Oilers were winning that one. And yet, they did. By the way, 13 shots.
I know.
Stuart Skinner played out of his mind with a 33 save shutout.
So this is exactly what makes this, or at least has the potential to make this upcoming series fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you're getting 2 goalies. Well, we'll get into the goalies in a second, but let's just wait. Everybody knows Skinner's side of this by now. Everybody knows, like, much maligned at this point, like hit or miss kind of guy sometimes. I get it.
Yep.
And then you've got, but you've got that offense that they have that kind of makes up for it. Go ahead, give up 3 goals a game. We'll score 4 or 5. No, don't worry about it. Right.
Connor McDavid will have 5 points.
But like where I'm getting at with that is that if you go to the regular season and go to the, okay, I get it. Like, the NHL point leaders, and we know who was at the top of the list, and McDavid was in that category and things like that. You end up finding a decent number of guys that they're going to play. That had good point totals, right? Like, you end up finding JT Miller and Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson. And it's like, okay, like,
Brock Besser had a pretty good second half.
Brock Besser, it's not about it's not about the point total. He was the goal scorer of the bunch. He had a 40-goal season.
Yes.
So that's the other side of the equation. And that's why ultimately I'm not surprised that they won their series against Nashville. The interesting part of that series was the fact that was surrounding the goaltending situation. Because how often do you see a team go through 3 goalies in one round?
Oh man. Vancouver absolutely went through it on the goalie carousel.
Well,
and they're still going through it.
Well, because the thing that they're really not to say they're really going through, but like they win game 1.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we don't know anything about Thatcher Demko. He's not available. That thing escalated from day to day to week to who the hell knows.
Yep.
Like
the current, I did hear something today. He may be back by game 4 or 5 of this series.
And that, but with a goalie,
and it might be too late.
Yep. Well, and with a goalie, who knows, right?
True.
So that with a goalie, it's always a question. They shift over to Casey DeSmith. He wins a game.
He looks great.
Looks perfectly fine, right? Does hit, the first game they end up losing. He didn't look bad, but you saw a difference.
Well, and he was kind of thrown in pretty last minute, if I recall, in that one.
And then he wins a game pretty convincingly, right?
Looks great. Right. Makes 29 saves. Looks great. By the way, Vancouver wins that game with 12 total shots on goal.
Well, that's insane. What we're gonna have to get to that part of it too, because that's what defies the whole thing is.
Well, and those are the problems.
Nashville didn't play bad.
No,
at all. Like they were really competitive. It was pretty amazing to watch down the stretch that you go to Artur Silovs, who's going to have to be the 3rd string goalie, has to start games.
And then he comes in and looks great.
And shuts him out in the last game to win the series. Like, incredible, right? Like,
well, and they win game 4. He only gives up 2 goals in game 5, and then he shuts him out in game 6.
Right.
And Nashville needs goal scoring. Don't get me wrong. They're not the most talented scoring team in the league.
No, but
any stretch.
But tell me you weren't thinking the second that Thatcher Demko goes down and the goalie on the other end is UC Saros, that now it's a goaltending mismatch.
Right. Right.
This could turn this whole playoff bracket on its head.
I thought that when it went to DeSmith, and then it goes to Shilovs, and it's like, wow, what now?
So you've got that going, like that whole thing happening. And that's how it's going to have to be. This is how it's going to have to be for at least, like you said, Dave, they're not going to get Demko back right away. So, it's going to be the way that it's been for a little while.
Well, and the thing, just kind of getting towards the prediction here a little bit. I think the thing that they're going to run into, the problem they're going to run into,
is a team that can score more.
Yeah, man. Nashville just can't score. Ryan O'Reilly was the only one who looked dangerous at all in that series, and everyone else I know they got some contributions elsewhere, but
here's the problem. Here was the problem with Nashville. Nashville had to win so much down the stretch to even get in and to have that spot.
Their gas tank was empty.
You're talking about a team that had a 19-game point streak at one point in the second half of the season.
It was 21, wasn't it?
Something like
19-0-2 or something.
Maybe it was that. Yeah, maybe that's.
Yeah, I think it was 18 straight wins and then 21 or 22 on the point streak.
I don't know if they got to 18 straight wins, because that would have been
maybe you're right.
That would have been pushing an NHL record, but they were right up there in terms of you're right. It was something ridiculous, like 18-20 or 19-21, something like that. They had won that many games, gotten points in all of them, and maybe that's what made me think that the series was going to get turned on its head when the goalie thing happened. That, this team ripped off a point streak of upwards of 20 games. So certainly they're going to make things interesting against a team like Vancouver. Now you just took away their number 1 goalie.
Sure.
Until the backup and the 3rd string guy played just as well, if not better, and
right.
so now you wait. you wait and see what happens with this series. You wait until it's kind of weird because this isn't going to get underway until Wednesday.
Yeah, very
It's
strange.
a really late start. Like the fact that you're going to have both the Eastern Conference series are going to be 2 games in the books by the time the puck drops on this series.
Right. And Boston played on a 48-hour turnaround.
Yeah, I know,
man.
But regardless,
yep,
I think you're right there with it. It's so far you've been consistent in a different way from what I've been consistent with so far. I've been ripping off 7s the whole show.
Yeah,
this is my shortest series.
Okay,
because I just think that when it comes down to it, the matchup, everything is very favorable for the way that Connor McDavid's been playing, the way Leon Draisaitl's been playing, the way Zach Hyman's been playing. I will even throw in the way Evan Bouchard's been playing because he started to find his scoring touch.
I think if Thatcher Demko's in net for Vancouver from game 1, I think we have a really good, really fun series. I have Edmonton in 6 here, and I think it's more likely to go 5 than 7.
Yeah, I can see where you're going from with that.
If you had to push me one way or the other, I'd push towards 5 because I just don't think it's not that I don't think Vancouver has the firepower. I think these teams are
play.
Right. These teams are built fairly similarly, right? These teams are both built on offense. And I mentioned in the first round that Carolina and the Islanders were both kind of defensive teams that had a little bit of scoring pop, but were mostly, really well structured defensively, and they were pretty similar. But Carolina was just a superior version of that, and their high end talent was a little bit better. Their defense was a little bit better. They just kind of nudged them in every category. I think you can say the same thing about this series, but just philosophically from the complete other end of the spectrum. Neither one of these teams is all that good defensively. I think Quinn Hughes is better than Evan Bouchard, but I think up front, Vancouver is just a little behind.
Well,
and it's hard to not be behind 2 of the 3 or 4 best players in the world.
Absolutely. Sorry. Yeah. So sorry to be boring, but I've got Edmonton in 6 as well.
Yep. So
and I'm right there with you. Like, I just don't know how, look, I'm not trying to put anything past Vancouver. They've obviously gotten by with the goaltending, and hey, listen, a guy gets hot from one series, if it transfers over, hey, who knows, right? But I just don't see how we don't see Connor McDavid in another conference final spot here with a chance. And I mean, that's what's good. Like, as much as I just said the thing about, whoever wins the Dallas-Colorado series is probably going to the final, I'd love to see Connor McDavid try to change that narrative. Like,
I agree.
Like I still think that when it comes down to it, that whoever comes out of the other matchup is going to be more likely to make it to the Cup final. But that being said, it's like, don't doubt the best player in the world either, right?
Well,
like, don't doubt his ability to take over a game or a series.
And if you do manage to get rid of Vancouver in 5 here,
that extra time could be big if it goes 7 the other way.
And Dallas and Colorado spend 7 games going to war and taking big fat chunks out of each other.
Oh yeah.
You never know, man. And once you get to the Final Four, I mean, it's all up in the air. So I do think it's going to be really exciting either way. I have Edmonton going through in 6. I think I speak for both of us here when I say we are very excited for pretty much all of these matchups.
It's going to be great. I mean, like,
the playoffs are the best.
It finally feels like, and maybe more so on the East side than like some of the Western Conference series, but it finally feels like we're getting to the meat of this playoff at this point where it's like,
I agree.
You've got 8 teams that are left that I think, like, I don't normally expect to go 8 for 8 in the first round in the playoffs. I think the reason that I did is because there were just some really good teams that you could kind of pinpoint were going to make it. Now I'm looking at a bunch of toss-ups, and I wouldn't be shocked if certain results go one way or the other. Like,
I wouldn't be surprised if I'm 1 out of 4 here.
I wouldn't be surprised to go 0 for and see Colorado and Vancouver playing against, Boston and the Rangers, right? Or go whoever, and that's the 2.
The great thing about this time of year is that those series will be great too. Like, regardless of where we end up, those are going to be some great series. And we will be back in a couple of weeks to discuss that. We may or may not have some scheduling issues. We'll figure it out. We'll get a show out at some point towards the end of the second round before the third round starts. In the meantime, follow us for updates on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. You can find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. And Kevin, anything else, or are we good to get out of here?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Here we are. Ring the bell. We'll see you.